So
Don't
Yes.
recording in progress. It has, you got it.
now
Okay.
it started. Yeah.
Started. Good.
Yeah. So I'll start with my presentation now. So just elaborating that, this is basically my own evolution in AWR, and I actively started this journey in 2016 and started learning more and more, although I can still say that I'm quite ignorant about a lot of things. So ultimately making that journey from just laparoscopic ventral hernia repair, and it's not just, it's like very good procedures like IPOM, then proceeding to IPOM plus, and then learning about AWR and the revolution which started in our country also. Now I've reached this stage where I could, try to do this procedure with some degree of confidence. And I can just say that I'm in the early part of my learning curve. I will honestly share with you that I have done ETEP RS for a couple of cases for a 4 centimeter kind of primary umbilical hernia. And this was the first complex hernia in which I did a ETEP RS. And this was a case of left-sided Spigelian hernia, and their limited TAR was done. So I'll just proceed with the presentation. So just again repeating that, I may be embarrassed by what I was last year, but I have made some sort of journey. And this is the history of this patient. It is a 73-year-old female patient, PMI 29.5. She had multiple episodes of pain with bulge in the left lower abdomen. Now, she had history of 6 surgeries in the past. All surgeries were open. She said all of them were for hernia. 5 were for umbilical hernias. She had no papers available, no details available. And 1 was for right lower Spigelian hernia 1 year back in the same city. She also had newly detected diabetes mellitus. And it was well controlled. The sugars weren't very high. So when I was looking at this patient, and she came and told me that isn't there, her daughter said, isn't there a way by which you can put a very big mesh in the entire abdomen so that she doesn't get any more hernias? And since it was a complex hernia, I wasn't even thinking of doing a ETEP RS because I thought it was beyond my scope and it will be too difficult for me. But when I started thinking and I saw this was an overweight patient, there were multiple scars on the abdomen, there was a reducible bulge on the left lower abdomen, and there was evidence of rectus diastasis from 4 to 5 centimeters below the zipisternum. So actually, I forgot to take a preoperative photograph of this patient, but she had a bulge in the epigastrium and she had a reducible bulge in the left lower abdomen. And she was just scared that she had just too many hernias and they were not going away. So looking at all these problems, I was thinking of, and now this is just sharing the CT with you. So this is the CT and you can see the state of the recti. And here we have the Spigelian hernia coming in, the left lower Spigelian hernia. And I will just share the CT scan report with you. So I have given this proforma to the radiology department. This proforma came from Dr. Jignesh Gandhi. So we had measured the distance between recti muscles at umbilical level, which was close to 9 centimeter. 5 centimeter above umbilical level, it was 3.7, and below 5 centimeter, below umbilicus, it was 3.5. Now, the thickness of the recti was also measured because I was kind of concerned. I'm always concerned. Somehow I end up finding a lot of right rectus being atrophied in many hernias which I have went on to operate, and including bigger hernias which I have then proceeded to do in an open fashion. So you can see again that the thickness of recti, it is close to 8 to 9 normally. So it was an atrophic recti. And the impression given was diastasis recti with defects in paraumbilical region. And there was fat herniation. There were close to 4 defects in the periumbilical region. also there was a left-sided intraparietal Spigelian hernia through transversus abdominis aponeurosis. The external oblique muscle was markedly thinned out, and the neck of hernial sac was measuring around 3.1 by 3.5 centimeters. So this was containing non-obstructed bowel loops, but this patient was having multiple episodes of obstruction. So now this is the diagrammatic representation I have made after the CT of the defects which were present. Now the challenges here were the wide diastasis, there were multiple paraumbilical defects and left lower Spigelian hernia. So what was the one procedure which could actually go and deal with all this? So I started thinking of IPOM, and I was looking at composite meshes that, okay, I will put one mesh in the umbilical region and one mesh will be for the Spigelian hernia. But then I was concerned because the patient's, one of the major complaints was also the bulge due to the diastasis. Now, this is how I ended up going in for this surgery as ETEP-RS. And I will just discuss my ports with you because they are different from the normal ETEP-RS we do. We start on the left side in the conventional ETEP-RS. And I decided to go on the right side because I thought the Spigelian hernia on the left lower side would come in my way of creating the adequate space which would avoid the pneumoperitoneum, or with, because the thing with ETEP-RS is that when you go on the left side, you go down completely up to the pubic bone and kind of create enough space so that even if there is pneumoperitoneum during the superior crossover, you can get over it and you can go on creating the space where the mesh is to be laid. So the ports were kind of mirror image on the right side. So there was a 10 mm port around 2.5 centimeter below the xiphisternum, around 4 centimeters lateral to it. And I did an open access merely because I find it simpler and it is safer, and it kind of is okay to go ahead with it in under any circumstances, and it's not difficult at all. And also the thing with the the ETEP or the TEP is the space. So the various steps which I planned out in my mind were the access, the dissection of the, one second, yeah, the access. So safest for me was open access, and it is the truth. Then the dissection of the retrorectus tunnel, create the first working port, do the pelvic dissection, then the second 5 mm port, and you change the camera. You come down to the second 5 mm port, you cross over from the superior side, then you shift the camera to the opposite side, divide the arcuate lines, close the posterior fascia, close the anterior fascia, and then lay down the mesh. So proceeding with this, now the actual operative after creating the space, the telescopic dissection. So this is the right retrorectus tunnel, and the first port has been made. And now I am dissecting and going towards the pelvis to create the space. So here we are going down towards the pelvis. This is the space where all the tappers go in for the TEP anyway. So it was a familiar plane for me. And so that is why ETEP looks more normal to me as I've been doing TEP. Then TARM, which also I have done, but somehow being in this space appears to be more normal, though it is essentially the same as they say. So the creating the right retrorectus tunnel. So I will just say here that my assistant, my camera assistant, was also watching this procedure for the first time. And this is, the speed has been increased twice. So as to see the maximum number of steps, the surgery went on for a long time. So I did not want to show a very long video. So here we are in the lower port, and look at the space being created near the xiphisternum. So this is the first 10 mm port which we have put. And with the help of the port, just aligning the port and the instrument in the second port, we are creating the space using monopolar, bipolar. Now we see that the posterior rectus sheath is, we can align the camera so that it is turning out to be like a vertical wall. And this is where we go for the crossover, which is the most tricky step in creating space in the ETEP procedure. So I wanted to be absolutely sure that I was at the medial end of the rectus muscle so that the proper crossover can happen. So as we can see, this is the bipolar going in and clearing a few fibers, making sure that we are absolutely at the medial end. And then taking the hook and incising the posterior rectus sheath. And this is to be done. Now the superior crossover is done so that we enter the space where the falciform ligament is there, the extraperitoneal space. And you see the posterior rectus sheath being cut by the monopolar hook, and then the falciform being dissected. The pearly white linea alba is at the top, and which is one of the main things we need to remember, that we never ever cut the linea alba, we do not bring it down. So a clear incision is to be given at the posterior rectus sheath, go into the space and pull down the tissue at the falciform ligament and start going towards the opposite side, taking care that we do not injure the linea alba. So this is more posterior rectus sheath being incised and the falciform ligament being pulled down. The superior you go, the safer you are, in the sense that you do not enter the peritoneum and do not injure the peritoneum. And this careful dissection is the key to going on to the opposite side and producing a clear enough superior crossover. So this is again the falciform ligament being brought down. And see, this was a previously operated patient. There were multiple incisions. So you can see that there are some sutures visible in the linea alba. And we'll soon be coming across the hernias, the multiple defects which are going to be visible pretty soon. So the careful retraction from the other port is of main importance. So now we are at the hernia and the reduction is to be done. There has just been a tiny rent in the peritoneum. So you can see there's a bit of Nemo, but it is all manageable, and that peritoneum rent will soon be visible in the video. So we can see now the various defects appearing. And the trick again, another trick is to keep between the peritoneum and the linea alba, I mean in the extraperitoneal space, so that you do not dissect in the wrong area. You do not start cutting the peritoneum and making multiple holes. So again, another defect being reduced. And you can see these were the fat bundles going in and causing the discomfort the patient was complaining about even preoperatively. So here we are again in the extraperitoneal space. We have dealt with two of the defects, and I'm trying mainly with the bipolar cautery. Now this is the third defect coming into view. This is all in the periumbilical area. And careful traction and counter traction to reduce the contents of the hernia. And now again, sequentially, we keep on cutting the posterior rectus sheath on the right side and going into the space and creating the crossover. And now very soon you will see, yeah, this is the peritoneum rent, which was creating a problem. You can see that in the background. And fortunately, till the end of the surgery, this was the only rent I created. And otherwise, the entire posterior facial sheath remained intact. So you can see the superior aspect of the right posterior rectus sheath being incised. And yes, so now we are reaching the superior limit here so that we can now go for the crossover. So now this is the crossover. The pearly white color of the linea alba gives way to a slightly brownish shade of the opposite posterior rectus sheath. And after giving an incision over there, then you go down and keep on cutting the recti on posterior rectus sheath on either side, creating the the left retromuscular space also. You can see the left rectus also now here. And this is the right, and dissect in the midline. This is the last bit of the hernia, which is to be reduced. And then again, cut a little more on the left side and keep on creating the space, complete space, which is to be used for the laying down of the mesh in the E-tip RS. So again, another defect. So there were a total of 4 defects here. And this is a part of the procedure in E-tip, which all the tappers are very familiar with. And the hernia surgeons especially find it very gratifying to be able to reduce these hernias. So again, careful and patient dissection so that we do not go into the peritoneum. And here we are going to the opposite side. So another precaution to be taken here is the neurovascular bundles at the lateral edge of the recti or the lamppost sign. So here we are coming inferiorly, and we'll be reaching the arcuate line and dividing the final piece of tissue here and connecting the whole space. So this is now the final bit, and here we are, the entire space being uh, connected, and this is the left Spigelian hernia. These are the 4 defects which were there in the periumbilical area, and this is the extent of diastasis which was there. So this is what we are dealing with, the 4 defects, the diastasis, and then we have the left Spigelian hernia to deal with. So the next attention was paid to this, and the reduction of hernia was done. Again, it was a huge sac going in between the external oblique and the internal oblique, and all the contents were reduced and space was created. This is the entire defect. And then more space was created around the defect. So because we need to lay a mesh in such a way, so the limited bottoms up TAR was done, just like we do in the E-tip, to create more space. So the idea here is that unless and until we create the space, we are not able to be we cannot give a good mesh coverage to this Spigelian hernia. So going up from here and doing this limited bottoms up TAR enables us to create the space for the mesh, which was the one single mesh which was laid here, but was also fixed to the ASIS so that the entire Spigelian defect was nicely covered by this mesh. So then this defect was closed intracorporeally completely and securely. So some backhand suturing, and we have this closed effect. And here we are looking at the complete space, creating the space, connecting the space. This is the peritoneum rent. So now we go on to close the diastasis recti. So now just with intracorporeal suturing, I was finding it difficult to close this diastasis, and this is one of the things I need to learn more. I need to work more on my closure of diastasis skills. But that day I managed with a combination of transfacial sutures and with the help of some continuous ones also. So the next thing I did was, after putting the intermittent transfacial sutures, I put the continuous intracorporeal suture also with a barbed suture. Then this was the mesh. So you see this, I measured the space, and the 30 by 30 centimeter mesh was taken, but it was measured in such a way that the top was 15 centimeters. Then like a fusiform shape, it was coming down, and it was 20 centimeter at the umbilicus and 30 centimeter down below, because of the wide space down below, and also because of the Spigelian hernia, which needed a adequate coverage. So then the mesh was inserted, it was rolled and longitudinally, and it was a challenge putting this mesh inside, and not putting actually, but then the laying over and spreading it over was a challenge. But once it was nicely kept in the various corners, because it was properly measured, once it was put into place, then after checking and uh, deflating and resufflating, we found that it was staying in place. So one of the things was that, we fixed it to the ASIS down below on the left side. And then we carefully checked the margins up there. This is the left side. And then on the other sides as well, checking everywhere. And then on the upper side, right side, and then this is the, I think this is the upper side. This is the patient who had come recently, like a week back, for the follow-up. So this is the message I would like to end with. And this was taken from Dr. Ramanna. I asked him that what are the don'ts in AWR, something which you never do. So don't operate on the obese. Don't be cheap. Spend money on learning the procedures properly. I think we end up spending a lot of money, but then it's all worth it, because it is our patients who are getting the advantage. And it's very important to learn these new procedures. And the thing is that with AWR procedures, you just can't attend one conference and start doing them. It is a very gradual learning process, and one has to be very meticulous about it. And one needs to be aware that when you start doing it, it's going to be very challenging, it's going to be very tiring, it's going to require a lot of time. But that time will come down. And the main advantage of ETEP is that the lack of pain. Now, this particular patient also was walking around the next day very nicely. She went home, she was very happy, and she's been doing so well. So that makes it all the more worthwhile. And when you do something and that procedure that fails, don't start doing it again and again. Do not divide the linea semilunaris, never ever. So that's another thing, when we go on to do the other procedures like ETEP, TAR, we'll need to remember, do not injure the neurovascular bundles. That is a crime. Don't use coated meshes in the retromuscular spaces. Don't be a cowboy doing too complex a procedure for your own practice. And don't do an emergency component separation. No TAR is an emergency. Don't do CST without a mesh. And do not operate on every patient you get. We need to, see what we can do now. Like, for example, loss of domain is a very, very special procedure, and that needs a lot of again research, and you have to kind of introspect, get better, and then get onto it. And don't do a procedure you wouldn't want on your own self. I think that is one of the main principles of laparoscopic or otherwise ventral hernia repair. And don't combine major procedures in one sitting. So if you try to do too much, then you will have a complication, and that will be a problem. So thank you so much. Thank you all. You have really, really been patiently listening to me, and I'm just so grateful that you were there to, uh, listen to this and give me inputs as to how you would have done it, how you think it should be done, and over to you all.
I think Ramana should speak, Ramesh should speak, because you know they have been doing it for a long time and they have attended this time. So
No, I'm
Ramana.
happy to listen and hear what every one of you has to say. And maybe at the end, I could put in my 2 cents. But
I think Meenakshi, you have done a good job. And if you say, I think that that was the first ever complex hernia that you have done, I think you have done quite well. It may have taken longer than what you expected, but I think for a first case, you didn't want to make any blunders and play safe. I just wonder, how could you measure the exact dimensions? I mean, was it with a thread, or how do you do it? 15 centimeters, 20 centimeters, and then 30 centimeters?
So actually, yes. So I took in that scale and marker I have. I've not put that in my video because somehow, that time the video was stopped and it was not recorded. So I put in that scale and I measured it with that.
You could measure. And that was a medium weight, or what was it?
Medium.
Acropore, medium weight.
Meenakshi,
Yes.
I'm spellbound, so I'm taking my time
Thank
in talking.
Those are very big words. No, please point out my mistakes and tell me how you would have.
Uh, I am, see, number one, it was a very complex case because of the multiple defects. Spigelian, again, depending on how close the neck is to the bony prominences, one has to take a call whether you can manage this by, without any bony fixations. So, and ETEP is a completely new approach which requires your mind to be geared to that kind of an anatomical uh, plane, which because of ETEP you did mention, because of TP you did mention that you are used to it, but still doing the crossover and not getting into the linea alba, all these are very important steps. And I think it was a wonderful demonstration. The video quality could be little better because I think you've tried to edit it and then run it in a
Please
fast,
just
but I think that is absolutely understandable because it must have taken time. So my only concern, or rather one of the major concern, I think I've over time as I'm becoming older, Josram, I'm sorry, but I'm saying that I'm becoming older in front of you, that why are we being apologetic? I think I'm becoming an activist now and less of a surgeon and more of an activist. Okay, and I truly believe that each one of us should read Sheryl Sandberg, because this is something that we do so freely. We keep apologizing for everything that you do. You've done a fantastic case. It is a complicated case to begin with so many major procedures on the abdomen. So actually it's very nice that you even got these retromuscular spaces pretty nicely. It is not something that anybody and everybody can do, so it shows your experience in the hernia surgery. It's your process that is very clearly seen, and there is absolutely no reason in taking that much pride and saying it. You don't have to be apologetic. It is a fantastic procedure. You've done it very well. You just have to put that across as it is. And we have to learn a lot from these procedures. So please do keep sharing. Okay. So ETEP is going to slowly gather momentum because of, I think, more because of the economic aspect than anything else probably. And also I think no surgeon really wants to put a mesh inside the peritoneal cavity.
Yes.
So we have been doing it because it's been sold to us, and we are saying that okay, the results are not bad, they are equal, and so on and so forth. And I do agree, for maybe small hernias, we do accept IPOMs or IPOM pluses, but ETEP definitely is a much better and much mentally more acceptable to me as a surgeon. So I definitely try to learn and do, and eventually we will reach that level of complexity. But it is a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Soumya and Pinky, you both are silent.
मैम मैं क्या बोलूं? It was amazing. I mean, for me as a beginner, as a learner, it was amazing. I have personally not done a ETEP RS. I've done ETEP inguinals. So I mean, she is saying ki first case, second case, or jo bhi, but it went off nicely. I could see all the don'ts being followed and the do's being followed, and so it's actually gone off well after doing some sort of a homework. So the take-home message for me as a new learner is understand the don'ts well. So if we understand the don'ts properly, we definitely can make sure that we don't do blunders. I think that's what budding surgeons like us need to understand, or if even trained surgeons who are foraying into these newer procedures need to understand what are the don'ts. And definitely mentoring and learning from a person will be required. Like just so that you don't get it wrong or you don't do harm to the patient, because when you are entering into the TAR plane, when you're doing a TAR, you are like sort of the last thing that you can do for that person, the posterior component separation. You're like trying to you're breaking that bridge, so you might as well do a good job. And this was such a complex case, and I've been talking to Dr. Meenakshi multiple times. She doesn't actually have a very trained assistant who does the camera work. So she has probably a nurse who does the camera work. So it's doubly difficult when you're trying to adjust the camera and then do the thing also. And the assistant is also new to it. So if you by chance go sometimes wrong, like sometimes in lab poly, you have these, you know, these things that you think that is the CBD and all those. I mean, that's the cystic duct and it's actually the CBD. So there is no one, a second surgeon or a second person to point out to you. Same would happen if you're operating with a very young surgeon who doesn't know these procedures. So I think it's a team building thing, with something which Dr. Jignesh also put up once in his presentation, that it's all more of a teamwork, all these complex cases. So hats off to Meenakshi ma'am to do this so well. I'm learning, and someday I'll do mine and then I'll put up the video with a lot of palpitations, but I'll try to put up.
Technically, just one query, Meenakshi. I think probably because of the video becoming too long, you probably didn't show it, but the dissection up to the psoas below the spicalian, and that was something I'm sure you must have done it, but that has to come through.
Yes, I think I missed that in my video.
And secondly, you said that it's difficult for you to do the divarication, but I think it's difficult for everybody, because first of all it is upside down, and secondly it is under the pneumo. So you're not doing a above down closure, you're doing below up with the abdominal wall under tension. So that has its own problems, and I guess it's only doing it again and again that will help to resolve it. And using the suture passer and trying to get some extracorporeal is also a good idea. We can take a few sutures like that, bring it closer, and then do the intracorporeal suturing for the relief. So that was covered very nice.
Yes, ma'am. Totally, I agree that extracorporeal suturing was a very good idea to bring that together. Otherwise, doing that suturing on the top, on the roof, is quite difficult.
I think there's a question Dr. Dipti Thakkar has asked: is crossover easier in diastasis or is it more difficult?
I have done, I think, 5 crossovers till now. I think it is easier in a thin individual. I don't know. Dr. Ramanna, can you answer that?
It's much more difficult in diastasis.
It's much more.
So this was
And
a
what
trick
mistake
question.
can one make? What is the
Deeply playing mischievous. It's,
what mistake can happen? You may go
you
into the
can,
linea.
you
You may
see,
cut the linea
there are, yeah. So
because linea would be broader.
that's right. That's right. And mentally, all surgeons are trained to think of linea alba as a line.
No.
But truly speaking, it's a band, especially in the subxiphoid and upper abdominal area. It is a broad band in many males and in females as well. Now, when you have diastasis, that gap is even wider than you anticipate. So unless you are experienced or you have already been sensitized to this risk of going into the linea alba as you attempt a crossover, what you would end up doing is you will incise the posterior rectus sheath, you will bring the falciform fat down, and you'll see the fibers of the linea alba, and you think that I can't see muscle yet. So you'll dissect a little more laterally, and you still can't see muscle. And so you'll think, यही तो होगा, दिख नहीं रहा है, चलो. And you may not be working with the best camera system in the world, and like Meenakshi might have suffered, the camera person may not be that savvy with it. So you kind of think, यहाँ तो होना ही चाहिए, चलो काटते हैं. So that is how it starts. And when it starts and you start looking at it more intently to see the muscle, you still can't see the muscle because sometimes in elderly patients that rectus muscle may be pale. Your camera system may not be that sharp to allow you to see it. So you may miss it and you may cut into the fat and make a serious impact on the integrity of the abdominal wall. So diastasis.
You will go in the subacute plane.
Yes, diastasis is certainly a very significant issue for a crossover. So it does need you to be careful, have good imaging, and experience. Yes.
So how do you judge the width then, so that you don't make this mistake?
Right. So there are several ways of doing it. And by the way, in all retromuscular or intraperitoneal procedures, fatter patients are easier to operate, not thinner. Thinner patients are more difficult to operate. The crossover is easier in fatter patients because you have fat. So that fat is your plane of safety. You can visualize it well. Otherwise, you may not be able to visualize. The peritoneum may be so thin that you may transgress it very easily. Anyhow, Josna, your question was
how do you judge the
how
width?
Judge, right? Okay. So the best way of judging, number one way I would say, is intraoperative ultrasound. All OTs in medium to large hospitals would have an intraoperative ultrasound because the anesthesiologists use it for various purposes. Small nursing homes may not have, but if you're into AWR, it may be one of the things you could consider investing in. But if you don't want to invest in it, there is an alternative way. You can mark the main landmarks with henna. Now you get henna in small squeezy tubes and all that. You probably are more familiar with it than I am. So you can do it in the ultrasound room 1 week before surgery or 1 month before surgery for all you care. But mark the edges of the linea alba, the linea semilunaris, and the defect edges as you map it on ultrasound. So the henna stain stays. If you do it with a marking pen, you'll lose it because the moment you start painting, that ink will go. So henna will stay. In fact, Vinay Mehendale had published on marking with henna many years back, and I had written an editorial for the World Journal of Surgery on this. So henna is something you can use.
But will that marking change with the insufflation?
Yes,
Intra.
It will change. So you will have to factor that in. So some bit of alteration is bound to be there. So even when you mark it intraoperatively, when you put in the pneumo and you try to place the port subsequently, it's going to change, right? So that's number one.
When
The
you
best
when you
is-
say intraoperatively, you mean to say we should have a probe
yes, yes.
which
Before
will
you
go
start
inside through the
painting, just before you start painting, or if you have a sterile setup, you can do it after painting. That is what I would
from the
suggest.
surface, not the
Yes,
intra
yes.
from the
I-
surface.
okay, not intra-operative ultrasound as in laparoscopic ultrasound, not laparoscopic ultrasound, regular ultrasound, right? With
Yeah.
the high frequency probe,
Yeah,
surface.
yeah, yeah.
So these were two methods. The third is measure on CT scan or get your radiologist to measure how much is the rectus width, how much is the gap in the linea alba, in the subxiphoid area, in the supraumbilical area, in the infraumbilical area. So you get these measurements, they won't give you. So you'll have to specifically seek your radiologist out and mark it in your notes, right? Now, this is all in the interest of you learning the procedure and trying to eliminate the big errors. You don't need to do this. I don't do this. But you could choose to do it in order to be more scrupulous, in order to be more careful. And it's a good practice. You know, it's like intraoperative cholangiogram or leak test after bariatric surgery. Uh, at some point of time, you just stop doing all this. But till you have really mastered that bit, you keep doing it because it's a learning curve. And the fourth method is palpation. So you palpate and feel the edge of the rectus, and that will give you the edge of the diastasis. And obviously, it's not going to happen in a patient with a very thick scar or with a lot of obesity. So these are the ways I would use to assess the
Okay.
landmarks.
So in this case, I actually did the third thing. So I went and looked at the CT again and again. And I sat down with the radiologist, and it was a combination of all the things coming together also. But ultimately, I did not cut the linea or create any other major problem while doing the crossover. I was very happy about that.
Actually, I have one query though. You said there were 5 or 6 surgeries before this. Was there any mesh placement during those surgeries?
Now, the wonderful part is the patient just did not remember, did not have any details. And the one surgery in which mesh had been put was the one done last year for the right lower sphygilian hernia. That was for sure a surgery with an onlay mesh.
So, what is actually very encouraging is that, in spite of those 5 full thickness incisions, I'm sure the surgeon must have gone up to the peritoneal lining, opened it, done the reduction. In spite of that, the retromuscular plane has been accessible, and it hasn't been very different than what we get it in a virgin patient. So that is something, is it's really encouraging. So maybe one shouldn't worry too much when there are multiple surgeries before venturing into an ETED for such patients.
In fact, the surgery done last year, the surgeon had also gone and explored on the opposite side for the Spigelian hernia and not found it. Did an open surgery, not found the left-sided Spigelian hernia, whereas it was clearly present in the CT scan done the last year.
Within the last year.
Yeah. So he had
Um,
explored on both the sides.
Meenakshi, shall I list down the points that I had made? I'll just wrap
Yes,
up,
please.
and
Yes.
I have a couple of other calls too.
Sure, sure.
Okay. So again, the first thing is it's absolutely the best thing to get peer review like this in a closed circle and put your work up for critique. This is absolutely a foundational method of getting better. So congratulations for doing that and committing to the process, and don't stop doing it. Now, about the technique of the operation, the first thing you started off with was the open port, which you said was the safest way of getting access to the retromuscular space, retrorectus space. Fair enough, but you must know that there are two significant disadvantages of the open port, which is why most of us do not do the open port anymore. Number one is you can create oozing when you're splitting through the rectus muscle fibers, and a small vein may just snap off and retract, and that ooze trickles down on the posterior rectus sheath. And when you put in a scope, you find there is a pool of blood and it's going to smudge repeatedly, because remember, you don't have your other ports inside now. You just have your first cannula and you don't even have pneumoperitoneum. So what happens is you go in, you meet blood, you come out clean, and go in, again you meet blood. So you can imagine, pretty frustrating, correct? So that is one disadvantage of the open port. The second disadvantage of the open port is that the incision typically ends up as a 15 millimeter port, and at the most you would place a 12 millimeter port. So this does not go all the way into the peritoneum. So it just goes through the anterior rectus sheath and the rectus muscle, which doesn't count. So it becomes very loose. So the moment you take your scope out, the cannula also tends to come out. So this becomes a recurrent problem throughout the procedure, and you would then think, "Arey yaar, ye kyun kiya isko?" You know? And taking pictures and all that is okay, but really, it's all not as good as what it would be. There's some noise coming from some of your system. Can you please mute yourself? All right. So the second point.
Halima, please mute yourself.
So the thing that Meenakshi did was access through the right retrorectus space, because the patient had a left recurrent spagium, right? So while this may look to be the logical way of doing it, it is more difficult for the right-hander. Meenakshi, are you a right-hander or a left-hander?
Right.
Right-hander. So for a right-hander, it makes more sense, more convenient to do the left retrorectus dissection by 3 left-sided ports, because you have to do that retrorectus dissection anyways. You do the crossover, put in your right-sided ports, and then bring the entire central complex down. And after that, when you go to the pelvis, you do the Retzius, you do the Spigelian, and if you need to do a bottom subtar, you have one port on the right side with which you can do it. And the big disadvantage of ETEP is that this flexible port system allows you to handle different quadrants of the abdominal wall. So I would say for a right-hander, do it from the left retrorectus space, top down, then crossover, then bring everything down, and then go. Can you do it in other ways? Meenakshi has already done it another way. So you can do it in any number of ways. My suggestion is just do one method and just get it rock solid. You know, you can't make a mistake in your port setup and your steps of procedure. When you become truly expert at one way of doing it, then you diversify. Don't keep doing one way in one case, another way in another case. Let's innovate. Don't. These things are now more or less well set, well established. Follow the path of those who have stumbled, fallen, and rediscovered a smoother path. So that is what I would say as far as starting from the left side or right side is concerned. As far as dissection, the retromuscular dissection is concerned, many of us have this habit from training days of laparoscopy when we trained early on, was to grab tissue with 2 instruments, one a Grasper, one a Maryland, and tear the tissues apart like this and move. In TEP, many of us do it. Sometimes I still do it. I catch myself doing it, and it's an old habit, right? So in the retrorectus space, this is just the thing you don't want to do, because you will end up with oozing, and these veins will retract, and you will naturally, with a Maryland connected to a monopolar, you are immediately tempted to grab it and buzz it, it will not stop. So you will have to get the Maryland out, put in a bipolar, and then coagulate that vessel. By that time, there is another small pool of blood which has happened, and it has stained the tissue. So
I
what
think
happens is,
Meenakshi used bipolar, didn't she?
no, she did. She did. Subsequently, she did. So what happens is the tissues get stained and your light comes down, thereby making your operation more difficult. So I would say use this bipolar seal cut or ligashure. Don't use a harmonic because there's too much of smoke, the snow which comes out and spoils your telescope. Otherwise, scissors or hook is very good. I would say hook would be the most versatile instrument. The fourth point for me is Meenakshi did show the neurovascular bundles arching up like this. So the signs and landmarks of the retrorectus space have been documented and mentioned in a publication specifically for one reason, so that all surgeons operating on this space do it, demonstrate the volcano sign, the lamppost sign, the sign at the bottom where you have the inferior epigastric with the vas and the gonadal vessels, the Mercedes-Benz sign, and at the top where the two posterior rectus sheaths are connected to the undersurface of the xiphoid, that's the frenulum sign, like the frenulum of the tongue or the prepuce. Why are we talking about these signs? Because it would be a reflection of methodical procedure, giving respect to the anatomical structures which should be preserved, right? So if you show me an operation and you show me those parts of the operation where these signs have been demonstrated, the volcano sign shows that you have not gone into the peritoneum. You have not gone into the linea alba. So you have brought down both the PRS, the falciform is at the base, the linea alba is at the top. The peritoneum is intact. So it immediately tells me that you've hit the right place. So that is why it is important for every one of us when describing an ETEP ventral procedure to say that these are the landmarks that I have identified. That is why I would say the landmarks and signs are an important aspect of the operation. Hemostasis, this is again related to the previous point of dissection, becomes a very important issue. That is why I would say prevention is always going to be more effective. So if you use your bipolar seal cut or ligashure, it makes the operation rather bloodless, but still this is a very vascular space and oozing tends to happen when you don't want it to. So here is a quick trick. When you are more or less, you've created the space, put in a gauze piece. The gauze piece may be doing nothing. Keep it at a place where you're not doing anything. But the moment you hit a vein, just use the gauze and compress it, typically over the lateral aspect of the retrorectus space where the neurovascular bundles are there. So when you try to dissect towards the neurovascular bundles and in between them, they may start bleeding. So if you use your bipolar there, you will end up destroying that neurovascular bundle. So what I would prefer is you pack that bleeding twig or neurovascular vein with that gauze piece and move on. Don't try to arrest it completely. That way, you will allow that bleeding to stop and still preserve the NV bundle. You can also use Surgicel, but it will cost you more, right? So these are two tricks you can use to safeguard your NV as well as achieve hemostasis. So Meenakshi, it's very good that you keep underlining that you have to respect the learning curve. You can't have learned everything about this class of procedures in one go. Even if you've done 5 cases, I guarantee you, you have not learned it all. So it is very important for every one of us to respect the learning curve. And to this end, I would say that the women's team must collaborate. if you do not have good set team, then you must build one. I would suggest that if there are other surgeons in Delhi or Gurgaon or nearby areas, Faridabad, wherever it is, when you have a case, you call that person. When that person has a case, you go out and help. So this has to be an effort, and you may have to take the leadership in initiating that and getting that thing. Uh, you may not find a like-minded person easily, but you will never find it just by sitting back at home, right? You have to make an effort. So I would say collaboration with your colleagues would be a good way of getting skilled help and doing the procedure better. I have said it once. I don't know. Many of our members are very shy and they may not respond overtly. But if I can do anything for you, I'm only too happy to. If you want a workshop, I'm happy to handhold you and get that workshop done and make a success out of it, where in those of you who are attending will learn hands-on or by real close proximity how to do the procedure more efficiently, more safely, and with greater degree of comfort. So as always, if you need me for anything, please let me know. That's about all that I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramana.
Thank you very much. Those were really very important words for all of us. And we have to continue this journey and keep on presenting, sharing. Dr. Punjani, do you have a remark for us?
It was a very good case that you did. I was a little interrupted because my OPD is running right now and there are a few patients waiting outside. But I saw it and I had seen it earlier when you had sent me the entire video. So it's a very good attempt. I am also like you, maybe a little ahead of you, but we are all together in the journey. And I think the Ramana tips were very important for me as well. Few things is that Ramana, since you are putting your first foot in the epigastrium, I think that linea semilunaris the demarcation is not so important according to me, because you will go into a retrorectus space and once you are inside, you will be able to decide where the linea semilunaris is.
No, I disagree.
Kavita, Kavita. Yeah, thank you.
On multiple occasions, my first port has gone into the lateral compartment. You see, in Indian patients especially, the rectus abdominis width may be much smaller than we estimate. Especially, like how it happens in the initial lap chole cases, you're so meticulous and so fearful that you will not injure the CVD. But the moment you have become confident is when you hit your CVD, right? Now, the same thing here. When you start doing the ETAP, you're very careful. Where is the linea? Where is the muscle? And I will go here and all that. But when you become like, okay, this is another case for today. Come on, let's put that. Overconfidence is when you get directly into the retromuscular space, the lateral compartment, and you don't understand what you're doing. And you try to dig in a little more and you enter the peritoneum. This has happened multiple times to me. So I would still say that where you enter is critically important.
Another thing, you talked about using not the blunt trocar but the OptiView. That's what you recommend for the first port.
Blunt trocar, blunt method of dissection.
So what I have
open method of dissection. Sorry, open method of dissection.
I have done it a couple of times with the OptiView, and then the problem is that you have to suddenly change from vertical to the horizontal, right. And there if you miss, you actually go into the abdomen. So that has happened to me several times. So I think I'm more comfortable blunt, but I think I'll try now more little carefully.
So a couple of tips here. What trocar do you use?
I use Excel. That is.
Stop.
You are talking about applied?
If you get applied, great. But use the Medtronic optical trocars. They are blunter. they will not easily violate the peritoneum. All right.
So you
And
said
the tip is you have to put in the scope as far into the trocar as possible, and you screw in the trocar with the scope looking at the screen, right? You see the anterior rectus sheath, and then little more, you see the vertical fibers of the rectus getting split, split, split. The moment you see a white dot in the center, that is your posterior rectus sheath, right? Now remember that we all suffer from the disadvantage of not having access to specific trocars designed for this purpose. So what happens to us is that the retrorectus space still is a chink, and you have to put in this length of trocar inside it without damaging the posterior sheath and the peritoneum. Whereas when the Americans do it, the moment they enter the retrorectus space, it starts insufflating and it opens up, and then you just enter in easily, no problems. So what do? We wait for that moment when you see the white dot in the center, and you now know that this is the posterior rectus sheath. At that time, your hand drops. So the direction of the scope, which was vertically down, now becomes like this. Okay. So if you're completely horizontal, what will happen is you will be splitting the rectus muscle fibers and not making headway. You'll be splitting those fibers and initiating bleeding. So what you need to do is you're going in like this, you see the white dot, then you bevel it a little bit, move a little more, bevel it a little bit, move a little more, and then you go. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you start much higher than what I may have taught early on. So start right under the rib cage, and then you may end up beveling just a bit, but you will enter at the right space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. But then you do it with a 5mm?
I do it with a 5mm because I have a good imaging system. I have a good 5mm scope. But
You
if
have
you don't, do it with a 10.
5mm 0-degree scope you have?
5mm 0-degree in one hospital I have, in the other hospital I don't have. So it doesn't matter. I'm used to it both
So
ways.
the 5mm 30, it becomes little difficult because that vision is so narrow.
Yeah.
That to appreciate all the
You can easily, you can pick your fights. So you can use a 10mm 0-degree initially, and later on at some time you can decide that now I will shift to 5mm 30-degree. That's
Now,
completely something.
do you split the table so that when your port
Always.
is at the epigastrium, that is a
Always.
must?
Always.
So
Yes.
at what is the highest point at
The rib cage. That is from a top-down position. You do it at the rib cage. You understand
so
what
the
I'm
chest
saying?
is like this, and
The break of the table is where the patient's rib cage is. So why? Why do we do this? Because when you're doing it from above, you're standing at the head end of the table, your hand
correct.
is going to hit the patient's head, or your camera is going to hit the patient's eyes. So you won't be able to suture from above if the patient is flat, or if the table does not break. That's a disaster. If your table does not break, it's a disaster. You shouldn't be doing it up that way. It's a torture.
So just at the xiphisternum should be the point.
Below, a little more.
Towards the umbilicus?
No, I said costal margin. Rib cage.
in between them, I think. In between them somewhere.
In between umbilicus and costal.
You got it, Jyotsna? You couldn't hear me?
No, I got it, but I still didn't get exactly at what point should be the
All right.
in the midline. If you show me in the midline. Okay, the lower border, you mean the lower border?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is where the bridge is going to be.
Okay.
Here.
Okay. Got it. And then you keep the same throughout, right?
Yeah. 30-degree flexion, like this, and tie the patient properly. Secure the patient properly.
Yeah.
Do you have a pic of that position?
Oh yes, I'll post it in the group.
Yeah.
In fact, there is a very good talk by Ahem Arora in the Smart Talk. It is on the YouTube channel also. ETEP RS, step-by-step approach. And I really strongly recommend it. And everything is there in that talk. So please do watch that.
By whom you said?
Ahem Arora.
Okay.
It's there in Hania Tube, no? It's there in Hania Tube.
And the YouTube channel.
It's our YouTube channel of AWRSC. And there are many good videos in that. So one of them is this.
Great. Thank you.
So anyway, thank you all so much. I think we have had a lively discussion. And
Thank you, Ramana.
thank you, Dr. Amana, Dr. Punjani, and thank you, Jyotsna ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for being there. And let's hope continue to have good discussions all the time. Good night, and
Good
see you
night.
next month. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.